Hi, and welcome everyone to this special edition of Cape Ann ARTWaves, coming to you by way of 1623 Studios, located in historic Gloucester, Massachusetts. I'm Christine Fisher, your host today. My fellow co-host, Jackie Ganem DeFalco, and I are celebrating our 6-month anniversary of Cape Ann ARTWaves, and we want to give a special shout out to all of our listeners for getting behind our program. Today, I am thrilled to be having a conversation with the distinguished, celebrated artist printmaker, Don Gorvette, whose highly collected reduction woodcuts reflect his passion and reverence for historic architecture and forgotten landmarks. Don's woodcuts are in many public and private collections, and I'm going to tick through a long list. This is important. It's a hefty list. In Massachusetts alone, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the Cape Ann Museum in Gloucester, the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Harvard Law School in Cambridge, the Addison Gallery of American Art, Phillips Academy in Andover, the Worcester Art Museum in Worcester, Smith College Museum of Art in Northampton, Duxbury Art Complex Museum in Duxbury, the Boston Athenaeum, of course, in Boston, in Maine, the Portland Museum of Art in Portland, the Farnsworth Art Museum, what a gem, in Rockport, Maine. Ogunquit Museum of American Art in Ogunquit. In New Hampshire, the beautiful Currier Museum of Art in Manchester. And overseas, the Museum of Fine Arts in Hanoi. I want to learn how your work got to Hanoi, Don. And the Fitzwilliam Museum, part of Cambridge University in the UK. So for me, I would describe Don's work as stylistic, bold, graphic, rhythmic. And as you can see by the two beautiful pieces behind me, I am a fan. But what I feel is so important to share about Don is that he has influenced so many artists and printmakers. He's been a mentor to many and is generous about sharing insight into his process, as well as what he has learned as a gallerist. So on that note, welcome, Don.
Good morning, Christine, on this windy day.
It is windy and it's cold. It's windy and it's cold. I want to make just a couple of comments before we get going. I want to first set the table by acknowledging that my husband, Rick Krangle, and I first met you at your beautiful studio in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, down on the harbor in 2003-ish. And since that time, we have visited with you numerous times at your multiple galleries located here in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine. And bottom line, your enthusiasm and your joy for your art form has always impressed us.
Thank you.
I think just to kind of bridge onto that, I think the thing that we want to say right out of the gate is that earlier this year, you moved your gallery back to Gloucester. In addition to having your presence in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, you're now located here locally at the Beacon Marina. So on that note, Don, let's get going. We've got a lot to talk about. I'd love to dig into your journey a little bit. You have a fascinating one.
Well, I was born in Boston, and we lived in the suburbs, not the suburbs, but the general locale around the Boston area, Cambridge, Somerville, Medford. My parents moved a great deal. And we finally, at probably the age of 12 or 13, made an attempt to live in the suburbs. And my parents were going to buy their first home. And we moved to Tewksbury briefly for several months. And we had to move back to the city because of my mother's asthma.
Oh.
And then we lived in Medford for about a year. And then finally, my parents bought their first home in Burlington, Massachusetts for the sum of $13,909. And so it was fortunate for me to be able to come to a new and vibrant suburb. And the high school was newly built. And as an 8th grader, I was able to attend Burlington High School. That gave me a tremendous opportunity to get to know and become acquainted with the primary source of my inspiration and knowledge throughout my art career. And that was Eleanor Marvin, and she was a magnificent teacher, extraordinary. And Ms. Kilgore was the head of the art department. Eleanor worked with Miss Kilgore, and she was just, they both were tremendous, but Eleanor Marvin privately tutored me for 5 years.
Wow. That's
And at the end of the 5 years, most of the knowledge that I had acquired as an artist, even to the present day, was acquired at that time, before I went to the museum school.
Oh, wow. And she introduced you to the Boston of Fine Arts, did she not?
Yes, she used to take me as a young student to the museum school to be interviewed every year with the dean. And finally, the dean wrote letters back to Burlington High School saying that I ought to be spending as much time as possible in the art department. And finally, the principal just said to Eleanor, "This is not an art school."
Well, I would say, Don, you really honored Eleanor beautifully, really, throughout her life. I met her many times when I went to your various galleries, and I'm so glad that we're talking about her. And there's another artist here on Cape Ann who also had the good fortune of taking art classes with Eleanor. Why don't you do the reveal?
Yes, Jeff Weaver. There was a group of us.
Yes.
I graduated 3 years prior to Jeff.
Yes.
But there was a group of artists that Eleanor mentored. Among them were Jeff Weaver, also a very celebrated sculptor, William Duffy in Baltimore and Washington. There were a number, too numerous. My brother, Ralph.
Right, of course, yeah.
Also mentored by Eleanor. And there were just many, many artists. Robert Swift. In fact, Nancy Duffy, who was also, Bill's sister, was also a student of Eleanor's. And she was inspired to become an art teacher. And she recently retired from Arlington High School and is a resident here on Cape Ann.
Wow.
And she's a wonderful artist as well.
Wow.
There are just so many people that we
Yeah.
can't even.
Well, small world, small world. And I know that you and Jeff, shared some early days painting Tony's fruit trucks, right?
Yes.
And
Tony's Fruitland.
and working on murals together. I think everybody will get a chuckle out of that. Don, why don't we talk a little bit about your sources of inspiration?
Well, I had determined at an early age that I wanted to live by the ocean. And in large part have not left the sea. And so much of my work is based on working city seaports. And I have a great interest and love of architecture. So I combine architecture of working seaports with vessels and seafaring cities. It's funny because somebody came into my gallery and they said, "You do a lot of ships." And I said, "I don't do a lot of ships." And I looked around the gallery and I thought, I actually do a lot of ships, but I don't think of them necessarily as how they do. I see them as beautiful architecture and shapes and forms. They're they're wedded to the seaport. And so I see them as I see most all my subjects, kind of in the abstract.
Now, your subjects are largely painted from these iconic scenes here in the Northeast. Is that correct?
Yes, and you mentioned painting. And actually, I painted for many years prior to my delving into the woodcut medium so thoroughly. Right. And what I love about the woodcut medium is it's a combination of all the different mediums. You color and drawing and carving the block. It's a kind of a I'm sort of a romantic constructivist. I like building and taking things apart and reassembling them.
I like that.
And it's an interpretive quality, and there is no shared kind of idea. There is a shared idea of what things appear like to people generally, but that's very, very, it's superficial in many cases. So the deconstructing of things means that you're going into the design of it, the color, the shapes and forms, the architecture of it, the emotion of it, rather than the appeared illustrative quality.
I love it. I think before we transition, because this is such a natural segue into talking more in depth about your process, I do want to show a couple of images. And if you want to make any comments about them, that would be great. If not, we'll just move on. I do want to show a memory of Vincent's Cove. And of course, I have an interpretation of Vincent's Cove behind me as well. And then the other image is Icebreaker. Or is there anything about those two images that you would like to talk about?
Well, the Vincent's Cove, I've done a number of images of that.
Yes.
Large black and white woodcuts, color woodcuts. The idea of the mythology of this cove, which once existed in the heart of downtown Gloucester, the mystery of it, and the fact that it was so lively in its day, not very long ago, the turn of the century. I think it was filled in large part 1917, 1918. But it epitomized what Gloucester was, you know, anchor works and shipbuilding, 3 shipbuilding yards, and the whole cramped in quality of it. And it's just the idea that it's buried and interned under Roger Street so fascinates me from a point of view of history.
Yes.
And so it's my way of trying to bring back a Vincent's Cove in a kind of in the woodcut medium.
Yes.
And it's just the mystery of it.
Yes.
And how it no longer exists.
Yes. Well, I have to say that you are the first person who introduced Rick and I to Vincent's Cove. I mean, we really didn't understand, you know, what it looked like in its former life. And I think that's one of the beauties of your reduction woodcuts. That you really,
you know what's interesting, Christine,
really
is that if you look at the liquor locker, there's a picture, there's a photograph of the the filling out of Vincent Cove. The liquor locker is behind in the background. That row of brick buildings, it still exists. And
this is a note to our listeners. We're all going to be tasked with going to look at that. So Don, let's talk more about your process, because your process is fascinating. I mean, I think folks would really be surprised to understand just how painstaking it is. You know, starting from a drawing, right? Just walk us through your process.
Well, woodcut is a relief process. It's a process where you have a plank of wood, and you have hand tools and gouges, and I use them as drawing instruments. And you cut into the wood wherever it is concave will not print. So you cut into the wood, you ink the surface of the block, you put paper onto the top of the block, and then burnish it from the back, or put it through my etching press, which applies 300 pounds of pressure onto the paper, so that the ink is transferred from the plank to the paper. When you peel the paper off, you have an image. That's a simple explanation.
Yes, right.
I've been doing reduction woodcuts, which is one block technique. And that means that you're layering colors entirely one over the other. And in between, you're cutting the block to make windows for the previous colors to remain. And I have here a study of the salt freighter out my window in Portsmouth. This is a salt freighter. This is a study in color, which I do. And it's very free and loose. And then there's going to be quite a transformation. This shows you a spectrum print, the layers of color.
Wow.
You can see to the right, and those are the numbers of colors and layers of which they were applied. Now there's an orangey color in that strip. This is what the block looked like at that orange color.
Ah, that is so interesting.
So it gives you an idea of the buildup of the layers. And this is the final print here.
Wow.
And so I can also show you the wood block. This is what remains of the wood block itself. So you will see large voids where the block has been cut over a period of time. So these woodcuts can no longer be reproduced. You start with a certain number or an addition, and whatever you get from that addition, even taking trial proofs, which actually turn out to be unique impressions sometimes, and have a beauty of their own. Sometimes you pull a print out and save it, and then at the end you print it and wish they all had turned out that way. So you don't really know what you're going to get until you're finished with the process. So people call it a suicide block sometimes.
Suicide block. I love that.
So
Talk to us about what your most interesting step is in your process, because you've got several steps in the process.
Well, of course, the first and foremost step is an inspired image. And then cutting the block is wonderful. And it's done in stages. And it's interesting because every stage has to be successful. And also at any stage, if you're not having a very good day or something is going wrong, you're not able to alter that block at that point. So it's a matter of having more things work as you would like than less. And the reduction woodcut is a lot like music score, in that every color has a place to make the large pictorial sound. So you're building layers, and each layer has its purpose in the print. So at the end, you combine them all to make a kind of a symphonic visual effect.
You're such a wonderful educator. I love how you sum that up. That's a great visual. You know, the other thing that I found really interesting about your process is that you can work with up to 9 colors.
Well, many people work with, I'm sorry, Christine.
No, go ahead, please.
Many people can work with many, many more colors. I try to use as few as possible. And generally it's not more than 10 or 11, because I don't want to lose, for my own language, the power and simplicity of the image. I don't want to break it down so much that it becomes a series of, looks more like a painting than anything else.
Don, there's 2 images that I'd like to show before we move off of this topic. One is Sharpshooters at Twilight, which is Vincent's Cove again. We love Vincent's Cove. And the other is Shipwreck on a Shoal. And then Shipwreck on a Shoal will serve as a nice segue into talking about your current gallery.
Well, the Sharpshooters at Twilight is an interesting print because, in fact, I rarely work from photographs, but when I do, you would never know that I have. And actually, Jeff Weaver had found an extraordinary photograph taken from the top of the electric company down into Vincent Cove, where a ship was being built at the turn of the century. And so that became my inspiration for that Sharpshooters woodcut. And I altered many things and changed things, but I thought that the photograph was extraordinary. The whole feeling of it. And revisiting this place, which had been interned under Roger Street and no longer exists. It's that extraordinary mythology again of the place. Yes. And the Shipwreck on a Shoal is similar. I went down Commercial Street, and there were ships lying among rubble, and the wharfs were falling in. And so I recorded this, and it's in the Harbor Cove, and none of it exists today. It's all been cleaned out and taken away. So it was kind of a requiem in a way for that part of the industry.
Yes. Well, you're kind of an archivist, honestly. We count on you for being an archivist on some levels, you know? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Don, this is a perfect segue for us to talk about your gallery, which is at Beacon Marina now, Beacon Marine. And I loved your comments when we talked earlier about kind of honoring the tradition of other Cape Ann artists who were drawn to Cape Ann and set up their own galleries, right? I mean, and really kind of cultivating a very entrepreneurial, if you will, environment of galleries.
Yes, I spent summers, and I lived, you know, a number of years in Ogunquit itself. And interestingly enough, 3 major places where artists visited in large number historically were Provincetown, Cape Ann, and Little 4 Square Mile Ogunquit. And so Ogunquit, when I first went to Ogunquit in the summer of 1968, was filled with small galleries and gallery owners. And I think this proliferation of artists coming all to one place creates an environment where they open up their own galleries. I found that joining galleries and putting work in galleries is difficult. Having your own gallery is terrific because you can orchestrate the setting, you can introduce people to it the way you would like, you can be there to discuss the work with people about what you're doing. So Cape Ann has this enormous, it made sense, you know, Rockport and Gloucester and these private galleries. And it's because of the enormity of interest there was in the community and the support of the community. And I have to say that I had a gallery, I had a workshop here at the Beacon Marine Basin. And when I went back to Portsmouth, I recalled wanting to be able to come back to Gloucester again to exercise and revisit Gloucester with all the new knowledge I had gained over the years since I was away. I wanted to re-see Gloucester with what I know now. And I came to the Beacon Marine and I said, Jack, if I come here, will there be a place for me to go? And he said, yes, there will. And I came back. And so I'm so thankful for Jack and his crew here to be able to be at Beacon Marine, which I think is the most fabulous. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else in Gloucester.
It's such an authentic setting for you, honestly.
It certainly
is. It's the perfect pairing. I want to talk a little bit more about your longstanding commitment to education, Don, and I believe you have 2 positions open right now.
Yes, we do internships both in Portsmouth and here in Cape Ann. In fact, I had 2 interns this summer from Mass Art. And I was introduced to the idea of the internship because when I had the gallery in Portsmouth, a young lady came to me and she had a friend. She wanted to give a gift certificate to him to study with me, and it was Sean Hurley. And Sean Hurley is a magnificent artist, and he's done wonderful etchings here. And he also resided at Cape Ann at the Beacon Marine Basin. And so he came to me in Portsmouth and he said, I'd like to take a course with you. And when I looked at his work, and he was such a gentleman, and I thought, you know, you don't need to take a course with me. Why don't you come here? You'll have complete run of my studio and you can manage it. And I bought him a computer because I'm computer illiterate in large part. So he was able to manage and do all of the things that I couldn't do myself. So Sean became really, in a sense, my first intern. Then later on in Portsmouth, when Sean left, a young lady, Kate Giunta, came into my gallery and she said, I want to work for you. And so she became an intern for me, and she also initiated the program of internship. So we started having interns from, you know, from New Hampshire and from various art schools, Mass Art, Museum School, et cetera, et cetera. And so,
what a splendid opportunity for them. And, you know, we can't move off of this without talking about the benefit of having a fantastic gallery director as you do.
Yes, Vivian Gale is my gallery director, and she is absolutely spectacular.
She is.
And she's an extraordinary enabler because I need a lot of help. And so she's created this wonderful underlayment and the infrastructure of what has to be able to run as successfully as possible a gallery. And so there are so many things that go into it if you really, really want to try. In these times, it's not like the old days. I had a gallery friend, Ted Jaslow. Well, what Ted would do when he came in the summertime, he'd kick the door open, hang the pictures, sit back in the gallery and smoke a cigar. And that's what was required. And so today it requires a lot more and so many more things. So Vivian is extraordinary. And I don't know what I would do if she were not.
She's fantastic. And as you say, running a gallery is a whole different beast today with the whole complexity of social media. Before we close out, I want to be sure to show this fabulous reduction woodcut that you did of Beacon Marine. Because this is where you are today. Talk to us about this beautiful piece.
Yeah, that's a view out my window here. And I really have done a number of other views and want to continue throughout the course of the winter because it's so incredibly rich and beautiful in texture and variety. And it just, the whole Beacon Marine is time stood still.
Yes, it is.
And not that it has to be interpreted in such a way, but there is no one way to do it anyway. But it's dynamic, very dynamic.
Well, you are very dynamic and your work is extremely dynamic, which is one reason why I feel I'm so drawn to it. Before we talk about your gallery locations and where we can direct others to find your work, I want you to explain this beautiful mural behind you and talk to us a little bit, put it into context. And I think you did this when you were starting out, maybe even in high school or just having graduated.
Yes, actually, when I was in the 8th grade, I was in the 11th grade when I did the mural. And, you know, Eleanor went to the principal of the school and said, we'd like to do a mural for the lobby. So I spent the entire summer at Eleanor's home painting the mural. And
Wow.
it's a conglomeration of various experiences from the old Holt's Pier and Revere and Egg Rock and Nahant in the background, which is really overly portrayed as some glorious European place, and mackerel and seagulls. And it largely was a result of the enormity of efforts in painting stage sets and backdrops when I was in high school.
Yes.
And that is the one place, if I were ever to train anyone on painting, it would be on stage.
Oh, that is a fantastic piece of advice. And that would be a whole other interview. I would love to talk to you more about your training in that area. Don, where can we find your work? You're an ambitious guy. You have a couple of galleries. Why don't you just walk us through?
Well, you can find my work in large part in the gallery established in Portsmouth in 123 Market Street.
Yes.
And that's the website there is Don Gorvett at dongorvettgallery.com. And here at the Beacon Marine Basin on 211 East Main Street. And also at the old print shop in New York, in Manhattan.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Don, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, I've been very, very honored to be able to be invited to your program.
Oh, you bet, you bet. It's been a real
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you, 1623 Studios.
It's our pleasure to have you. Thank you so much, Don.